Hi, I'm talking with Sean Gallagher tonight about the Pilates Anatomy poster set that was original from Joe's 939 8th Avenue studio in New York City.
Hi.
Hey,
How are
how are
you?
you?
I'm good.
I'm
Well, I'm
good
actually,
too.
I'm sick. I am sick. I
You're
look sick.
sick.
I do know that. I don't have COVID. I tested.
I don't know. You're almost smiling. Usually you have that resting, you know what face. So now you look good. So you should be sick more often.
Oh my God. I'll keep that in mind.
Okay. Keep smiling.
Yeah.
See, when you got a sniffle, you're like,
I'm
it's
trying
almost a
to,
smile.
yeah. Thanks. All right.
You're
How
welcome.
how are you doing?
Uh, I'm good.
Good.
Getting things done. I got a few things that I'm working on that'll be a little surprise coming up. So it's
Oh,
coming.
cool. So tonight we're talking about the Pilates Anatomy poster set.
Yes.
Yeah. So would you give us a little background, like where did these posters originate from? Where do we see them first historically?
Well, historically, you see them in Joe's studio, but they were also in Carola's studio.
Okay.
And the way that I got them was that when I was running the studio at Purchase, the Pilates studio Purchase, Carola contacted me and wanted to know if I wanted to, have some things for this, the studio up there.
Oh, that's so
So,
nice.
so I went and visited her, and we had a really great conversation, spent, a couple hours. And, what she was, said, I want to give you these, right? And she brought out the five posters. And, she said, I've used these, I'm a massage therapist. I've used these to, show clients, where the muscles are, problems, issues, I use them a lot.
Uh-huh.
And I'd like to see them continue to be used.
That's so cool.
And then she said to me, Joe was the model for these. So since that's what she told me that. So, and again, this is, the 1990s. So this is
Uh-huh.
way before, I was really, that interested in all the history as we are now. And we know so much more. Like we know that,
Well, we're gonna get
uh,
to this part.
oh, okay. Okay. Well, so, so I basically, I need to tell this story because,
Okay.
she gave me the posters, she gave me a picture frame of her doing the exercises, which, somebody that, was a student at Purchase that is now a Pilates teacher, basically stole from Purchase and put him in his
Uh-huh.
studio, which is, rather unethical, but they do what they do. People will do all sorts of things. So if you ever see, original pictures of Carola in somebody's studio, you should ask them where they got it from and see, if they tell you they inherited it, from Purchase, they didn't inherit it. They took it without permission.
Okay.
But anyways, I got to put that out there. So she showed me, she gave me one of those. She gave me the anatomy posters, but then she spent a lot of the time showing me and was really excited and wanted to, show me all of her pictures of her doing contortionist roller skating.
Cool.
So with like crazy pictures, like the stuff she was doing was like, I was like, Carola, oh my God, this is like nuts. And she's, I was, she was like, I'm very good. I was very good at this, and I really enjoyed it. And, so she spent like half the time I spent with her was that, I later went back and had a session. I only had one session with her, but she offered to give me a session. So I went and had a
Well,
session,
that's
which
so
was,
cool.
yeah, and it was great. It was
Where was that?
at
Where
her,
did it take?
in her apartment.
Was it like on one of her original reformers?
No, she just gave me the mat.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow,
Because
neat.
she had pretty much retired by then, but she was,
Yeah.
she gave me and I was like, let's, I'm ready to try anything, and she took me through her mat, and it was pretty much the same mat that I do with Romana. There was one or two, I wasn't paying attention then, so there might, I think there was one or two things different, but it's not like today. It was like, well, what's different? And you did this, and you did, it was none of that, all that stuff that goes on today didn't go on back then. You just went
You,
and took sessions. It was like,
you
okay,
weren't
cool.
like you weren't like, do you mind if I put my phone right here and record you teaching me? No?
Well, did I have a phone by then? I don't know if I had a phone by then, but yeah, they didn't have camera yet. It was just a phone.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't take pictures.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a camera or anything else. And it wasn't about that. You know,
I
it's
know.
kind of
I'm
like,
joking.
it's kind of like what Kira said yesterday about, you know, she was a dancer. You know, I was a PT, I was Pilates, and I was interested, but I was working with Ramona. But, you know, Carola wanted to, you know, donate stuff and give it to, you know, to Studio Purchase. And I was like, okay.
So Joe had them hanging in his studio, but we do
Yep.
not know, like how he got these made into posters. Somehow he has these images blown up into poster size, but we
Right.
don't know how that came to be.
Right. We don't. I mean, I don't. There's nothing in the archives or the business records that. Well, I should look because there, you know, there is, you know, the book with all the, you know, where he wrote down, you know, what he sold and bought and this and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
You know, or at least what he bought. So maybe there's something in there, but I went through it. It didn't pop out to me at any time for that. So, you know, it could be there, but if it was, I don't think it was specific.
And same with Carola. You know, we know he had the posters, and then she had the same posters, but we don't know,
Right.
you know, how she got the same posters. I mean, she obviously spoke with him and got them the way he got them, but we just don't know how that happened.
Or she got them from him. You know, I mean, he
had extras or something.
He was, you know, she taught for him for a while. So when she went to do her own things, we know that they were friends and they were friendly, and she went up and stayed, you know, like everybody's like, oh, I was good friends with Joe. Well, you know, nobody went, you know, we know that she went up and stayed in his bungalow. It's like, you know, John Steele, he was such good friends with Joe, but like, you know, his special place, he never went.
Right.
You know, and he even, like, he didn't even know where it was. It's like upstate New Hampshire or New York or something like that in his testimony. So he didn't even know where it was. So,
right.
But so we know that they were really friendly and they did all those things together. So, you know, he gave her some of, you know, copies of some of the stuff he had for her studio.
So that's 5. She had the 5 posters, and we know that Joe had the same 5 because we can see them on his walls. But did he have more than those 5?
Well, what you see on his wall, I mean, the typical one that everybody sees, there's the one, the pictures with Elaine Ewing, right? And also Chuck has some of these too as well.
Yes.
Basically, there's 4 behind the archival pedal pole.
Yeah.
3 of the ones that I sell, but there's also one there that is not there. It wasn't part of it, you know, and that's coming. It's in the pipeline.
Okay.
And it's more about the circulation. But then there was another wall, like there was where the pedal pole is. If you look at, you know, and we've sort of gone through this before, but when you look at the studio, there was the big mirror.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, if you're looking at the mirror, to the right was the pedal pole and the windows.
Yes.
And that had 4 pictures, anatomy posters, right? And they were about the same size. I mean, I didn't change the size. They were pretty much the same size. So they're pretty, you know, I added stuff to the top, you know, and then on the other side of the mirror was another set of anatomy posters. And it was the other 2 that weren't on that side. And I think even one of the ones that was there, he had there as well. And there was a number of other ones, you know, of anatomy. And some of those were in Beckett. So, you know, the problem was they were in Beckett, but they got damaged from the water.
Yeah.
So they're you know, they were like half gone. So,
right.
You know, I'm in, you know, but I have found them and they're in the pipeline. So I'm going to hopefully reproduce everything. So eventually you'll be able to have all the anatomical information that Joe had in his studio on his wall in your wall, on your wall.
And in Becky, you have the frames that he had them.
Yes,
in too.
I have. Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I had them. They were in the frames.
It's really cool.
But because of the water damage, you know, they like, you know, some of it was just, you couldn't even read it anymore. And some of it, and it was stuck in the window, and you know, it was like, so it was sad because it was like, ugh, you know, but you know, I was able to, you know, figure out and find them, and you know, so they're on the list. I got a lot of other things first because I already have anatomy, and you know, I have still a lot of those left. I mean, they're now patinaed. You know, they've been around so long. The edges might be a little dirty and a little rough. That's why I sell them, but they're not sold as new. They're sold as
vintage.
You know, vintage because they are. So the edges may have a little. The edges may have a little roughness on them and stuff like that. But you know, when you put them in a poster, that disappears pretty easily.
Kind of funny to think that in the 90s is vintage now.
Well, that's 30 years ago.
So weird. So now, you know, an interesting thing is we talk about anatomy today, and Joe and things, but, that he had so many posters that showed the anatomy, yet he didn't, speak in anatomical terms. Well, in teaching and in the exercise
Right.
things, except for the rowing series does have anatomical terms in it. That's the only series.
He uses, I mean, he uses it a little bit, but it's not, like the way I look at this is that, I've taught anatomy for 25 years in the university. I've taught, I've dissected over 40 bodies. I was a lab assistant for 8 years. I was the professor for 1 year at NYU's PT program in the anatomy class. I taught anatomy at the New School for 12 years, and at Marymount for another 5 or 6. So I've got a little bit of anatomy teaching under me.
Yeah.
And if you notice, when I teach the workshops and trainings, I mean, if it's related to anatomy, I'll talk about it. But when I teach Pilates, I don't use anatomy.
Right.
I don't teach anatomy when I teach Pilates because you don't need to.
Right.
And part of that is because, anatomy is a good thing, but not everybody knows it. And I'm they're not paying me to teach them anatomy. They're paying me to work them out and teach them exercise. And if I say lift your head, they know what that is. If I say lift your knee or straighten your knee, they know what that is. Tighten your quadriceps, release your hamstring, semi-tighten your psoas. I mean, you can talk that way and sound smart and all that, and that's great.
Right.
But it doesn't really. That's the real issue is that's not how the brain understands movement. Right. And so, for you as a practitioner, I think it's good. Listen, the one of the best Pilates teacher I know and ever study with, her anatomy was not good.
Yeah.
And that's Ramana.
Right.
She would say things sometimes as an anatomist, I'd be like, and I wouldn't say it. And afterwards, I'm like, Ramana, let's talk about this. And I would try to, gently tell her, like, that's not really the way it is. It's like this. And, and she would learn. She was always open, but she didn't know her anatomy that well. And you don't need to, because basic movement terms are what people, that's what they've been doing since they were kids. It's not until they get an adult and they want to sound smart or they want to be a doctor, or a therapist or something like that and talk, a different language so that they sound intelligent. And, they are smarter because they have a different language, but that's not how it really works.
Yeah. I mean, it's just interesting that Joe had that, that many posters of anatomy on the walls, yet, he also wasn't like a, trained anatomist as far as I know.
No. And
maybe self-taught.
Right. Well, and if you look at his writings where he mentions it here and there, but it's not because that's not what it's about. He knows that, he knew the anatomy very well, obviously, because and he studied it. And he understood the muscles, but it wasn't, his system is not about muscles. It's not about making a muscle strong.
Right.
It's not, because that was and it's still, in a lot of places, it's still the mode of operandi where people follow, which is single muscle or muscle group, pump it up, build the muscle. And he wasn't about that. He was about whole body exercise, making everything work. And, if something was weak, he knew where it was weak. And if you had polio, what muscles were affected and, and that then, yes, muscle, testing for one muscle, that has or muscle group that, when you have a disease or a problem, then that's viable. But, Pilates teachers aren't therapists or doctors. So.
Well, I think the posters were also part of his aesthetic in the studio.
Of course. You had a whole wall of you look at Joe and he's almost naked, and then you strip the skin off and there's the anatomy. So it's like that. He was one step away from the anatomy poster.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. All right, so now let me just look through my questions a little bit here.
Okay.
So now we could talk about the story about how she told you that, what you were saying earlier, that he was the model for the posters. So she tells you that, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Right. So. Yeah. She's like, he said he was, Joe was the model for these, and that's what she told me. That's what I put on the poster. That's what that's, because that's what
that across the top.
It says that on across the top of the poster because That's what he told, she told me. And when your teacher tells you something, you're assuming that they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Or she was a well-known Pilates teacher. She had,
She knew him.
She knew him. She
Yeah.
spent years with him. She spent years teaching. I'm assuming if she's telling me that's what the deal is, and that's what he told her, more likely than not. Well,
Possibly.
since then, I collect old books, and I collect books on anatomy. I have like 3 shelves or 4 shelves of just anatomy books.
Yeah.
And one of the books I got was, you have it there, right? You want to pull it out real quick?
Well, it'll be backwards.
So, Anatomy for the...
Anatomy for Art Students by Arthur Thompson.
Right. And there's different editions.
Yeah.
And if you look at the timeline, it's very, very unlikely that Joe was the model for that book.
Uh-huh.
But the pictures from the posters are from that book.
Yeah.
So, like the 5 posters that are well known, there's 4 where you can see the person's body and the head and the person kind of, and there's just one of them is just the lower extremities and the legs. So, maybe he was there for the legs, but I don't think so.
So this is the 1915 edition. So some of the pictures are really interesting, but though the anatomy, there's actually a lot of anatomy. I just don't want to hold up a naked person, but find something.
Well, that book shows the anatomy poster
like
and the
here's
person.
An example.
Right. Well, why don't you find one of the ones that's from the anatomy so you can show, and then because next to it has the picture of the person who's the model, and it is not Joe.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I really want to do that because I don't want like Instagram to flag our video and take it down.
Right. Okay.
Because it shows naked people. But that's because
right.
they're anatomy.
Nowadays you can't do anything like that. So so they had a little loincloth thing, or it was erased or something.
It's like
it's erased. It's photoshopped before they had Photoshop. So you can't really see, the private parts. They're kind of
so
gone.
weird looking,
right?
By the way. Yeah.
So, it's a eunuch. There's it's a eunuch.
Yeah.
So basically, but it's the picture of a person, and then there's right next to it is the anatomy poster picture, and it's not Joe. So we know that it wasn't Joe, and so what, and the thing is, there are different editions. So that 1915, he could have, but it wasn't in that book. And if you look at the earlier editions, it didn't have all the same pictures. So he added stuff as he went along. So the first edition in 1890, might have been 93. What does it say? What's the copyright? I think it's 93.
Hold on. I'll look. It's just the pages are so old, it's like hard to turn them.
If you find the first, when it was first copyrighted.
I just have to actually get that very first page to peel away from the other page. All right, there we go.
You have your white gloves on?
No.
Oh, no.
Okay, wait. 1896.
Oh, 96. Okay, so that's the first, edition. So 1896, he was born in 1883. So 96, he was 13.
But that is the age he says that he was a model for charts.
Right. So possibly, but what's the problem?
He was not in England at the time, and the book was published in England.
That's right. So if it was published in 1896, he probably was working on it in 1895. So he was probably 12.
Well, I sometimes I suspect, we don't know yet, but one thing I've wondered is, because he never said, Joe never said, I modeled for those posters.
That is correct.
So he could have actually modeled for posters or for charts at that age at some time. And then at some point in time, Carola got the story almost confused, and she was like, oh, he modeled for those posters.
Well, it's like that's what he had. Right. Well, that's what he had.
That's what he had.
He said, I model for anatomy posters. So she was like, "Oh, Joe was the model for these."
It could be.
And if he gave it, I'm sure, of course.
Yeah.
That's the reality. I mean, that could definitely be the case. But at the same time, We don't know. So
We
maybe
don't.
someday, you know, as people keep looking and keep digging and, you know,
Yeah.
people start realizing it's like, oh, look what I found.
That's one
It'd
of
be
the
nice.
Pilates history's mysteries.
Yes. But
Yeah.
again, you know, it's the same thing like when you say, you know, it's the story because the story gets told and you read it in an article and then,
Yeah.
you know, you're like, wow. And there's an anatomy poster and it looks kind of like a Joe, maybe a little bit, who knows?
Uh-huh.
And then they're like, oh, it must be Joe.
Yeah. Well,
So,
what the other part of this is too, like, you know, because, you know, he said, I model for anatomy posters. She
right.
said, he modeled for these posters. You put that on the poster. But that's like the story, that's history. The whole scope of that
Right.
is Pilates history. So even though it's not correct on the poster, that's the story
That's
that's
how
like
that got that way.
documentation. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's
That's how it
cool.
got that way.
Yeah.
And so now those posters are not only
Vintage.
vintage, they're
Yeah.
historic.
Yeah. They are.
You know,
But that's a story, though. That is something I tell my clients. They're like, Joe Pilates was the model for these posters. And then I say, well, and there's like a whole conversation you can have with your clients about it. And they love that.
right. Well,
I mean,
it's, you
because
know,
we love it. It's
right.
interesting.
Well, look, if you love it, your clients will listen to it because you're, you know,
Yeah.
they're talking to you and they like you and this and that. You know, but what's great now is that, you know, I did that almost very early. That was early on. So, you know what it was? It must have been early 90s because I think that's when I first published them. So it was probably
Okay.
earlier than what I said.
Okay.
It was 92 or 93 because it was right after I opened you know, I took over the Pilates studio soon after.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think, I'm not, you know, dates, I'd have to go back and look. You know, I have the
Okay.
records. I just don't, you know, I don't keep every record and date in my head, you know.
Really?
No, I don't. But
Oh.
that's why I have all those boxes. So if I ever really need to find it, I
Yeah.
can.
Okay.
But so, you know, that was part of it. But what's great, you know, and that was, you know, the idea back then is, as it is still now, is that, you know, I made the posters. So why? So that Pilates studios could have the same posters that Joe used to, you know, for anatomy. Because if you need to talk about a muscle or show a muscle or somebody comes in with a diagnosis or an injury or something like that, you can go and talk to them and say, this is here. And the difference is, you know, what I'd like to see is the Pilates teachers, you know, not talk about the muscles, but talk about how that muscle works with all the other muscles in the powerhouse and how it connects. And, you know, that's really the system and understanding it that way. And that's what I'm trying to teach and get people to understand.
Well, actually, that brings me to my next question because I was going to ask you what differs between these posters and anatomy posters from back then compared to anatomy charts of today.
Well, most anatomy charts today are, you know, when you open a textbook, they're in the anatomical position, which is somebody standing up and their hands, you know, like facing out like that, and fingers, you know, and that's called the anatomical position. You know, and that's great. But then what happens is that people think that that's what is like the ideal, and that's what we should work for, and that's what we should try to do. But, you know, that perfect body is, you know, 0.001% may have that perfect body. Everybody else, that 99.99%, has all sorts of variations and, you know, postures and weirdness and everything else. And the anatomy, the older the anatomy is, more likely what you're going to see is the body's in functional activity, life-like positions and movements and functions. Real life stuff, you know,
the
or
old
if
charts.
you go, right, the older charts like Joe's, you know, because, you know, it's interesting, right? You know, the one guy, what's he got in his hand?
It's like a kettlebell or something.
Yeah, it's popular again today. It hadn't been for who knows how long. Now, you know, last 10 years, kettlebells are back. Well, you know, this guy had a kettlebell and it was from the 1800s or early 1900s. So, you know, it's interesting that way, right? So you have that, you know, so we see that history return, but that's what he was doing. It wasn't like just standing. He was like actively with weight, and so the muscles are popping. They're supposed to be working. They're doing this stuff.
We'll get to the questions at the end. I'll read some out loud to you.
Okay.
Okay. So because that's what I was gonna I found interesting because I remember when you taught me that in a workshop, you know, whenever that was a while back. But I found that to be pretty interesting, like how you were saying that with the anatomy charts and the anatomical position, you know, we start to believe that every body, all of our clients are symmetrical and the same on both sides, because that's what we're used to seeing as far as charts go, but that's not very realistic.
Well, you know, having dissected 40 bodies, I can tell you that you can have a muscle on one side that's not on the other side. You can have an extra bone on one side that's not on the other side. You can have a muscle missing that's supposed to be there on both sides or one side. I mean, I've seen all sorts of anomalies. And that's, you know, when I teach anatomy, I always talk about the, you know, and even that chart, it's like I call it the 70% rule, right? So like 70% kind of have that configuration. So that's what they put in the book. But that means there's 30% that has all these other weird variations. And so if you only study anatomy and you study that chart, and then somebody comes in and it doesn't fit, you don't know what to do, because it's like, well, it's supposed to be here, and why can't you work that? You know, and then they try to force that, and it doesn't work because that body doesn't have that anatomy.
Yeah.
And they're trying to make it fit that picture, and it doesn't fit.
Totally.
So you have to understand that everybody's, you know, we're all the same and we're all different. And so we have to understand that. And if you don't understand that, it creates, you can create imbalances and stresses and strains trying to force somebody to fit that model. And that's, you know, and so, and it's, you know, it's kind of like, you know, with the training manual. The training manual is a guide. It's not a Bible. An anatomy book, an anatomy picture is a guide. It's not a Bible. It's not like, that's it. That's the only way. That's the only way you can do it. And I know some trainings have sort of gone on that route where they try to make it say like, well, this is what you have to do, and this is how it is. And it's just, you know, and all my years of teaching and doing Pilates and therapy and teaching anatomy and everything else, it's just not how it works. So the old stuff makes the most sense.
I remember you had said too, like somebody could have like one side, like their bone is actually bigger than the other side bone.
Right. Well, you can have it. Right. Well, you know, like you can have a hemipelvis where one pelvis is a little bigger than the other. So it automatically, if you sit down, you're skewed, right? Because so now you side bend, and then that puts a curve in your spine. So you have a scoliosis, and you think, well, they should be even. You know, you can have and you can have a smaller leg, shorter leg, but the only way to really do that is through an x-ray. A lot of people say, oh, you know, somebody told me I had a shorter leg because they did this measurement. Well, unless you do an x-ray, you don't really know, because you can have a shorter leg because your muscle is imbalanced.
Well, you know, the thing that's like my takeaway from all of this, because I always found this so interesting when you talk about it, but is that we don't know what's inside people's bodies, and we're probably not going to know. So, you know, a big part of our job is to really just get people moving. I mean, of course, we're looking for balance, but that can only go so far, because we truly don't know what somebody looks like inside.
That's why I came up with the term, the best balance within the imbalance, because balance is a fallacy.
Yes.
Not only structurally and anatomically, but neurologically, because, you know, everybody, even people who say they're ambidextrous, still have a dominant side that they use. They don't go, oh, I'm going to do the right hand and I'm going to do the left hand. Now, there may be one or two or a few.
Yeah.
But the 90, what the population is either right or left-handed. And if you're right or left-handed, how can you ever really be balanced? Because you do everything with the right side compared to the left.
Yeah.
So it's just not, it's a balance.
Yes. So now, before we get to a question, if anybody's interested in purchasing anatomy posters, where can they find them from you?
Well, you can get the anatomy posters. They're sold as a set on the Etsy store, Pilates Posters. So if you go to Etsy and type in Pilates Posters Store, I think, or just Pilates Posters, it should take you to the store, and you can purchase them there. They're $25 each, but they're sold as a set. So it's 120. I think it's 125, right? I think that's what I sell them for.
Yes.
Yes. So, it's 125 for the set of 5. And I've seen, I see more and more pictures now. There's either the anatomy post, what I see the most is the around the world, which is great. And, Joe's happy, because, it's the anatomy posters and the return to life poster. And now some of the other ones are starting to show up as well. But those two are, done there the most.
Yeah, so we got some. So Alexi is complimenting the posters. She's saying that they're
Yeah.
beautifully made and that they're very high quality. I agree. It's really very nice.
Yeah.
It's great
Well,
to see them on
yes,
and
you know,
around the world, like
you
you
know,
said.
and like I said, you know, they, you know, so the edges might be a little bit off, teeny bit, but you know, most of them are in good shape.
Well,
So,
they have some patina, right?
yep, yep.
So now Elaine is asking, what did all the dissections teach you, Sean, about the powerhouse?
What did all the dissections? Well, you know, when you teach anatomy and you do
Uh-huh.
dissection, you know, the whole point of that is to go to each muscle because
Uh-huh.
when you study anatomy, you know, you learn the origin, where it comes from, the insertion, where it goes, the innervation, what nerve innervates it, the blood supply, and the action, right? So what is it supposed to, what's its main action? What's its main thing? You know, the problem with that, all right, is that that's all based on what? The anatomical position. Well, when we teach Pilates, how often are we in the anatomical position? So the origin, insertion, and how it works, and what's working, and what is its action. You know, the innervation is the same, right?
Uh-huh.
But you know, the innervation, you know, that's what really needs to be looked at is because how's it innervated, and you know, and what's the message that the muscle's getting from the brain, and the message because the muscle has to constantly switch from stability to mobility depending on where it is in relationship to gravity and what's the job it's acting to do. And its job is to either move or hold the muscle or the bone, pretty much,
Uh-huh.
or you know weights that you know that are still within the you know that the bone is you know if you're trying to pick up something, but you know but that's what it that's its main job. So
Uh-huh.
you know when you're looking at it in that way, it's not really about you know what did I learn about the powerhouse. What I learned about the powerhouse is that there's an upper powerhouse and there's a lower powerhouse. And the way that happens is because the extremities have to be controlled.
Uh-huh.
And where do you control them from? The upper powerhouse and the lower powerhouse. And those two together work the center of gravity. You know, Ramana didn't start talking about the upper and lower powerhouse until I started telling her about it and talking about
Uh-huh.
it. You know, for her, it was always just from the xiphoid to the pubic bone, front to back. And that was the thing. A lot of people think the powerhouse is the front. It's as much the back as it is the front.
Yeah,
Because
for
all
sure.
those muscles, you know, the stomach muscles, where do they attach? Majority of them attach to the back. And the
Right.
fascia that surrounds the muscles on in the low back as well.
Uh-huh.
So there's all this integration and how it works. And so it's really about, so what did I learn? You know, there's a lot of fascia there.
Uh-huh.
And the reality is fascia doesn't change quickly. Everybody's into this myofascia. And look, I studied with John Barnes, who brought myofascial release, you know, to the forefront to PTs and massage therapists back in the 80s. I did a clinical affiliation with him, and he took that from the osteopaths. So I went and then studied with the I studied at Michigan State and up in Canada at the Canadian College of Osteopathy and Philadelphia College of Osteopathy. So I studied a lot of the osteopathic techniques. And you know, Ida Rolf, you know, Rolfer, you know, she started with the osteopaths. That's
Uh-huh.
where she learned about the fashion and all that stuff, you
Okay.
know, through the osteopaths. And she wasn't a doctor, so she was able to understand that and start working the fascia instead of the muscles
Uh-huh.
and develop Rolfing. So,
Oh.
you know, so what did I learn?
A lot, sounds like.
We don't have enough time here to do that. And
No, we don't.
I put a little bit of that, you know, different parts of that in my webinars and my lectures so that they
Well, that's what I was going to
people can
say.
really understand, you
Yeah.
know, what that is. And I try to talk about it, but I also, you know, I really talk about, you know, don't, you know, I try to explain why you really shouldn't try to teach anatomy as
Yeah.
Pilates because
Yeah.
first of all, it's just not how the brain works. You
Right.
know, the brain doesn't go, oh, contract your psoas
Right.
on the right side, 50%, you know, in relationship to stability, and on the left side, 75% for mobility while you're working the QLs and the
Right.
transverse abdominis and your pelvic floor muscles. It's like
Yeah.
it just doesn't do that. It's, you know, it does all these different, it doesn't go by name, and and most of it, majority of it is automatic. You know, movement doesn't happen because we think about it.
Right.
You know, movement happens because we see it and then we imitate it. That's how we learn it most of the
Uh-huh.
time. right? We see,
Yeah.
that's why, dancers spend their whole, all day long looking at movement and then trying to reproduce and imitate it. And they don't do it by naming the muscles and thinking about this muscle and that muscle. Now, you can do that. I mean, you can train yourself to do anything, I mean, we can train ourselves,
we can.
so you could train yourself to do that. But most people, it's just not a reality. And unless you stick a needle in that muscle, you have no idea what it's doing.
Yeah.
It may be working. It may not be working. It may be working 20%. It may be working 50%, maybe working 70%, and, but if I say go from A to B and I show you how to do it and I guide you and I use my hands, that makes a lot more sense than saying contract your muscle 40% and this muscle and that, it just doesn't, it just doesn't work that way. So that's why
I can tell this is a favorite topic of yours.
Well, because I hear people,
because you also think you're interested in it.
Well, I've been, listen, I used to, my little photo on Facebook used to be me, cutting up my cadaver.
That's right. I remember that.
With my legs up on the table in second position, bent over, digging away. So it was my, I taught it. I enjoyed it.
Okay. Yeah.
I still enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. So we got one more question, I think, from Dolly, which is, how old was Carola Trier when she retired? I'm not sure if we know.
I don't know. I don't know that offhand right away.
You know what I do know? On my Pilates History Research Archive, my website, I have a section for when Carola closed her studio. And she wrote down a lot of things about the closing of her studio. And she wrote down the date that she closed the studio, too. I don't know off the top of my head what that was, but you could look and see. I think it was 1980, I think.
Right.
But it was a process. It took like a couple years. She was trying to sell it.
Right.
She had a few different people who were interested in buying it. She wrote it all down. And then she wrote, today I closed my studio. She wrote about it.
Done.
Yeah. But, so I don't know how old she was. She wasn't retired, I guess, because she taught you too from her apartment. But she had.
Well, I mean, it was, she would, that was sort of like, she went, she's like, would you like the experience? And I said, sure. So I don't think she was teaching all the time, but it was something she was willing to, do for me.
That's super neat.
Can you still do that today? I think that's the second position. Well, since I don't have a cadaver table, I don't know if I could or not.
I don't know if that's the best position for one's back.
Well, if you have the flexibility, it's fine.
Yes.
I just, I did have surgery on my back, so I'm not as flexible as I used to be in my hand, but I've been, slowly coming back and getting it back. So, but
with Pilates.
With Pilates, what do you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and I guess if I was still dissecting, I could get in that position and just stay there for hours and then not be able to walk right afterwards because I've been stretching for so long. But,
that sounds painful.
Well,
yeah. Anyway. All right. Well, I think we've covered today's topic pretty thoroughly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that, because that was really the anatomy posters were the first posters that I brought, tried to bring to the community.
Yeah.
And, bring back, make available for the community to be able to have and use and all that kind of stuff. And
yeah.
So that was that was the difference. And look I've gotten so many more, and there's a lot more. There's a couple this year that are going to be coming out. So it's going to be good.
Yeah. So they were like the first step toward what we have today, thanks to you.
Yep.
So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. So tomorrow I'll be talking with you again, and our topic will be another item that you began to produce around the same period of time, but you continued to publish for about a decade, I think it was, is the Pilates Guild calendars. So we'll talk a lot about those and what
archival calendars.
Yeah, the archival calendars. So we'll talk about what was in those calendars and the story behind that. So I look forward to that. A good archival discussion. Yeah.
It says Joe's the model. You can talk about, like Elaine said, the stories. And, listen, do you need to know anatomy to be an amazing Pilates teacher? No. Will knowing your anatomy make you a better Pilates teacher? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as simple as that. The more you know, the difference is, if you're going to try to teach anatomy as Pilates, that's where I kind of draw the line. I just don't think that you need to do that. And when we look at how it was taught, because when I have the audio of Joe, and when he does that, he doesn't, it's up, down, in, out, very limited, vocabulary. Doesn't go into, it's not like, do this with your, biceps or triceps or quadriceps or hamstrings or, transverse abdominals, pelvic floor, psoas, none of that. I don't, you just don't hear that because he didn't, you don't have to. It's not needed.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us.
Ellen.
And hopefully
everybody.
We'll see you guys tomorrow.
All right. Bye, everybody.
All right. Okay. Bye.
Thanks, Elaine. Really appreciate it.